Wow. Hey. Pura vida, mi gente. Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys being here. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. This is a live recording, live video. Wow. Yeah. Just wanted to get back into a book that we kind of got into. The book got pretty deep. I'm going to remind you which one that was. It got pretty deep, and I think it's gonna have some pretty deep chapters. But I didn't want to skip any, like too many, right? So I want to read a couple chapters or review. We're gonna review actually for educational purposes. Review, critique, education, commentary, fair use. All right. Wow. Welcome, welcome. All right, all right. So we're gonna go ahead and get back into this book right here. The Princess and the Prophet: The Secret History of Magic, Race, and Black Muslims in America by Jacob S. Dorman. Shout out to the author, for his work. And if you want to, have a physical copy and support the author and get it, go ahead and do it. I recommend it. And, I also have a PDF copy for my Patreons on my Patreon page in case they're interested for the support. So before I actually continue, just want to go ahead and remind everybody about the previous parts, right? So I created the playlist just now, since we have 3 videos now, and the Princess and the Prophet is called. And if you guys remember, I guess part 1 would be the great Armmah Sotanki, Walter Brister, right? The Princess and the Prophet in Old Kentucky. Do you guys remember that video? Okay, so who Armmah Sotanki? He was trying to say how he's linking certain people with Thomas Drew, or AKA Noble Drew Ali. Okay, gets pretty deep, pretty controversial, and something to follow up on. And but the second video, Black Muslim Movements Planted in Chicago's World Fair, 1893, Nobles of the Mystic Shrine Masons, right? That was a fire drop right there. That was a real, real good drop. Um, I mean, if you missed it, you got to make sure to catch that one. That was a real, real good drop. There was something he was hinting at. It's a very revealing video. It was revealing for me, just reading it with you guys, you know. So today, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get back into this book. Let me just see. Okay. Okay. So we go to chapter 4, and it's called Imperial Inferno. Yeah. Little bit of water. Here we go. I'm gonna try to read 2 chapters today, or go review, 2 of these. Let's see how we go. It says the labor strife that was brewing during the world's Columbian Exposition, with its 25,000 person labor congress, burst out into the open as soon as the fair closed. The world's fairs, huh? So what happened when they closed? All of a sudden, you got all these unemployed people. So remember, remember to dodge the hijack when we hear it, and we're gonna pull out the babies, of course, right? The thousands of working people who built the towering plastron lath-fair buildings found themselves out of work just as the nation confronted the worst economic depression it had ever known. Another of the cyclical depressions that plagued the country in its boom and bust Gilded Age. The trouble had started in February 1893 when the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad collapsed, followed by the failure of the National Cordage Company in May, when the U.S. Treasury's gold reserves dipped below 100 million. Investors feared that the nation would go off the gold standard for its currency and rush to withdraw their deposits from banks. 30 steel companies, 50 railroads, 4,000 banks, and 14,000 other businesses failed, most by the end of 1893. I wonder who owned a lot of these businesses. Could it have been a lot of wealthy black folks? Getting disfranchised, The following year witnessed more than 1,300 strikes against factories, mines, and railroads as unemployment reached 20%, and many of the 2.5 million unemployed rode the rails as hobos in search of work. The suffering was nearly as bad as the misery of the Great Depression. With the close of the fair, the panic of 1893, and the widespread strikes and job losses, armies of homeless, hungry, and desperate people were everywhere in Chicago, carpeting the stoops and sidewalks like the frogs in the Egyptian plague. According to crusading British journalist William Stead, saloon keepers did their part by providing tens of thousands of their customers with free or extremely cheap victuals along with their grog, while the city's aldermen converted City Hall into a vast homeless shelter. Visitors, there found a pavement of human bodies, and the stench from so many unwashed and destitute people created the foul odor that was worse than Chicago's famously odoriferous stockyards. All right, you guys hear that? What's going on? It was said that 1 in 10 faced starvation. Those who staved it off only did so by stealing food to survive. Faced with suffering on such a horrific scale, on November 12, 1893, journalist Stead convened a meeting to discuss the crisis in the Central Music Hall, thronged by men and women of all grades, races, sex, and conditions. You guys hear that? All races, sets, religion, beliefs, right, and conditions, including both respectable matrons and corporate titans, sitting next to notorious madams, anarchists, and socialists. You guys hear that? Like a movie. Which his fiery rhetoric, his condemnation of the rich and comfortable, and his extolling of the saloon keepers and madams who at least provided food and lodging for tens of thousands of the dispossessed. Stead reminded those assembled of a Hebrew prophet with his fiery rhetoric, thick red beard, and blazing blue eyes. After Stead sat down, socialist Tommy Morgan stood up, directly addressed the well-to-do people, and called for someone to blow them out with dynamite if they did not heed Stead's warnings and provide relief for the suffering of the indigent. Jeers and cheers alike greeted Morgan's inflammatory remarks, forcing Stead to plead with others to defer to another occasion the thunders and threatening of dynamite. Only 3 months later, Stead published a 450-page Jeremiah entitled If Christ Came to Chicago, with a frontispiece picture of a vengeful Christ driving the money changers from the temple in ancient Jerusalem. Only Stead replaced the faces of the money changers on the cover with recognizable portraits of some of the city's wealthiest and most prominent corporate and political leaders. The phrase instant bestseller does not do the book justice. The tome sold 70,000 copies on its first day alone. Wow. And spurred the creation of a new civic federation of Chicago, composed of Windy City's wealthiest elites and most prominent reformers, such as hotel magnate Bertha Palmer and settlement house pioneer Jane Addams. The American political and economic system teetered on its axis following the fair, and that axis was a lot shakier than the massive steel rod that turned the now dismantled Ferris wheel. All right, you guys hear this? After the World's Fairs ended, right, and when they started taking down the old world evidence, right? The federal government suspended silver purchases in order to preserve its dwindling supply of gold, which harmed the Western silver producing states and drove several decades of populist agitation among farmers and others who found their flawed champion in Oklahoman William Jennings Bryan. Bryan argued that the nation should back its currency with silver and famously asked not to be crucified on a cross of gold. But the bombastic populist lost 3 presidential races as the Democratic Party's candidate and was forever crucified as the cowardly lion. Rhymes with William Jennings Bryan in L. Frank Baum's classic 1900 parable, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, each of whose characters may have been meant to represent, listen, a different interest group in the strife that was tearing America apart. In the spring of 1894, Ohioan Jacob S. Coxey led an army of hundreds of the unemployed on a grand symbolic march to the nation's capital, where President Cleveland refused their demand for a federal program to put the unemployed to work building roads, an idea that would be resuscitated with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Works Progress administration the next time the nation ran into a Great Depression. A young radical named Eugene Debs organized the workers in the company town of Pullman Railroad Car Manufacturing Company, just south of the abandoned exposition grounds, toilers who called themselves the White Slaves of Pullman. They formed a railway union open only to white workers and started a strike that paralyzed rail traffic in the Chicago area and much of the nation from May through July. In Chicago, mobs of youths and the unemployed used the opportunity to destroy property and vent their frustrations against the wealthy. Soldiers riding train cowcatchers fired into crowds of desperate, angry workers blocking railroad tracks and shot down 34 people over the course of 2 weeks of clashes. The police threw Debs in jail, and he came out a committed socialist. He went on to help found the radical union, the Industrial Workers of the World, in 1905, along with socialist and labor leader Big Bill, Haywood, anarchist Emma Goldman, and many others. Debs ran for president 5 times as the candidate of the Socialist Party, the last time managing to win almost 1,000,000 votes, despite the fact that he was then imprisoned in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. In the midst of all the bedlam of 1894, fire fiends put the plaster and lath White City to the torch in July. Listen to this. And thousands of Chicagoans gathered in Jackson Park to watch the blaze light up the sky. Wow, they burned down the White City, guys. Literally a place called the White City. I've shown you the images. We're talking about these World's Fairs. It looks like ancient Rome, ancient Greek, so-called Greek, ancient so-called Rome, right? This is so-called Rome. This is the true old world. The Chicago Tribune reported that the crowd celebrated the spectacle and did not mourn the passing of the fair that had entertained so many but also contributed to the labor, unrest, and massive economic inequality that had thrown the city and the nation into such a tailspin. It was a grand, glorious ending to the most splendid and beautiful thing Chicago had ever created. said one of the leading papers of a city long familiar with the regenerative potential of destructive fires as the nation struggled with massive unemployment and militant strikes. Chicago's elite civic federation waged war on the big open gambling hells on Clark Street and drove them out of business or underground by the end of 1894. The economic depression that the nation faced in the quarter century after 1893, and especially at its nadir during the 4 years after the fair went up in flames, was not so easily vanquished. This was not just an economic crisis, it quickly became an existential one as well. It is probably safe to say that in no civilized country in this century, not actually in the throes of war or open insurrection, has society been so disorganized as it was in the United States during the first half of the 1894, right? When we're talking about, isn't this fall like during Reconstruction period? They're so disorganized, huh? What are they doing? We're talking about changing history, doing a reset. What's going on? Never has human life held so cheap. Never did the constituted authorities appear so incompetent to enforce respect for the law, wrote H.P. Robinson, editor of the Trade Railroad Age, judging the crisis of the 1890s more critical and more menacing than any since the Civil War. It is not surprising that the events of those days should have awakened in many quarters grave misgivings as to the stability of our form of government and serious doubts as to the adequacy of our present political conditions. Many agreed that their nation's very survival was at stake. Leading minds came to find the culprit for the country's economic crisis that at first blush must have seemed strange. The very manufacturing dynamos celebrated and even worshipped in those towering plaster temples of the White City were in a sense the culprits causing the country's economic woes. If there were not enough Americans with money to buy all the things US industrial workers could now produce, the country would just have to find more consumers overseas. Listen, overseas. The United States of America could pull itself out of the economic doldrums, these sages argued, and stave off a workers' revolution if it could only convince more people outside America to buy its goods. The best candidates to become American consumers were these populist brown people. Listen, man, the best candidates to become American consumers were these populist brown peoples. Brown people, are you brown people too? Some of you? Brown peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So called black, you mean? Brown's people. They targeting a certain people, right? With American, what is this, products or goods? Look how back they were already starting to do this, guys. Listen, this gets pretty deep, this book. That's why I like reading this. It gets starts breaking down certain backgrounds and certain things that people never really think about. Targeting brown peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, huh? Who happen to be represented mostly on the carnivalesque and distinctly Oriental Midway, not the palatial manufacturers hall of the Greco-Roman Court of Honor. Europeans had their own manufacturers and their own colonial territories where they could market their goods. The US had no colonies or overseas territories outside the contiguous and recently reunited states. Listen, this is before they became a world empire, America, right? The corporation. But not all European empires were created equal. In particular, the Spanish Empire had seen better days and also controlled valuable colonies both in the Western Hemisphere and in Asia. And so when Cuba waged war of independence against its Spanish overlords in 1898, right? This is real history right here. And a US ship blew up in Havana Harbor. which they blew up themselves, guys, to start this war. You know, this is like now public info, right? That they blew up their own ship, their own people would, just to start the war anyways. So a U.S. ship blown up in Havana Harbor, likely a faulty boiler. The U.S. seized upon the explosion as a pretext to declare war on Spain. Like I just said, they did the whole thing. They orchestrated. That's like they still doing today. It helps the Cubans to victory, right? So they declared war on Spain, helped the Cubans to victory. Steam across the Pacific, claiming islands and atolls along the way to be used for coaling stations, and joined the Filipino rebellion against Spain with the added and ultimately erroneous reasoning that the Philippines could become a gateway to the lucrative Chinese market. So you guys see what they did? So anywhere Spain had its, they had it, they were like a, basically colonial power. In any country, they were a colonial power. U.S. supposedly went and helped the local people in their little revolutions, right? They funded all of it. Probably they created the wars, and then that's how they took over. They still doing that today. Who's funding who today in the Middle East? Supposedly they're like, to take over another. Yeah, yeah, right. So once enclosed in the Filipinos' best fortified positions, the U.S. made peace with the Spaniards and waged a brutal war against the Filipinos themselves. You see that? Which incensed Mark Twain, president of the American Anti-Imperialist League, as positively un-American. See what they did, guys? Man, both fascinated by his age's new industrial inventions and completely hapless in business, Twain was nothing if not a creature of the 19th century and accurately perceived but dimly understood the economic and political rackets driving the new 20th century imperial expansion. I bet you the Chazars had a lot to do with it. So-called American, huh? In other words, it was not the Columbian Exposition of 1893 that convinced American elites to get into what Twain called the European game of overseas imperialism, and it certainly was not the fault of the millions who watched African drumming, Hindu and Arabian magicians, Islamic educational instruction, or Balinese dance of the Midway, let alone the thousands who got stoned out of their gourds on German alcohol and Egyptian hashish before taking in the views from the towering Ferris wheel or tethered hot air balloon. All right, so they're talking about all the people in the World's Fair, even the workers, guys. Remember what we read already previously in this book, you know, how it was set up, different countries, different people. Like they had black folks portraying Muslims, portraying Hindus, portraying these mystic Egyptian, you know, and that's where a lot of these secret societies came out of, and yeah, and these master teachers, the 5% or something, like all that. Yeah, remember? Check out the videos if you haven't. It certainly was not the fault of the millions of workers who starved, struck, accepted reduced paychecks, manned barricades, and faced down armed soldiers and Pinkerton guards in the tumultuous 1890s. The United States political and corporate elites were determined to master the colonial project and stave off workers' revolution, no matter what Twain, like former President Grover Cleveland, derided, or derided, derided, or deride. How do you say that, guys? The whole enterprise of taking over other people's countries by force as un-American, an exploitative racket that allocated the spoils of imperialism to elites at the expense of the masses of workers, soldiers, and the colonized themselves. Workers were not hypnotized by the World's Fair into supporting overseas imperialism by the mystifying hegemony of the elites. Just the opposite. It was the white city's collapse and an inferno of arson, labor, militancy, and nationwide financial panic that convinced American corporate and foreign policy elites that they needed to enlarge American economic markets or risk the end of their power and the possible collapse of the nation as they knew it. They said, we got to take over everybody else before they take over us. That's what they're saying, right? But you see how of an important thing the World's Fair was to American history, right? And now you see even economy, right? Even though greater numbers of prominent Americans joined Twain's anti-imperialist organization that spoke in favor of imperial expansion, the press had a field day with the military victories. Overseas. So military victories overseas, and much of the American public came to support the adventure, knowing on some level that they had lost the ability to control the state, if they ever were able to do so. Listen to this in parentheses. Look, they put it in parentheses. Afro-American troops in parentheses, right? Because there's not what's Afro about them. Played crucial roles in the fighting both in Cuba and the Philippines. And the Democrats' candidate, William Jennings Bryan, staked his candidacy on the silver standard and lost to William McKinley in both 1896 and 1900. Bryan was a staunch opponent of American overseas imperialism in the later election, and yet voters preferred stability and President McKinley. Then in 1901, a foreign-born anarchist assassin, slew the president at the Buffalo Pan American Exposition. Guys, listen, this is happening in the World's Fairs, a murder, and this is a big thing I was finding out when I was doing my research on the World's Fair. You know, this is like things I got planned for future videos and stuff, but they actually mentioned in this, I didn't know. Yeah, somebody got slain right there in front of everybody, got assassinated. Slew, as they say here, slew at the Buffalo Pan American Exposition, seemingly confirming every fear about the radicalism of workers, anarchists, and immigrants at a fair designed to celebrate the country's newfound hemispheric ambitions, all right? It's all orchestrated, guys. Just like they do today. It's all to push certain things. What you see in the news, these mass things that where there's mad crowds, they're still doing it. They try to involve emotions to force decisions. Theodore Roosevelt had become New York City Police Commissioner in 1895 in response to the exposure of the rackets of pimps. Pimps all over New York in 1895, guys, listen. Gamblers, police, and politicians that oversaw that city's Tenderloin district then vaulted to fame as the swashbuckling Rough Rider, hero of the Battle of San Juan Hill in the Cuban phase of the War of 1898. With McKinley's assassination, Vice President Roosevelt took office and put the American imperial expansion into overdrive, both in Asia and in the Caribbean, which he endeavored to turn into an American lake. With his foreign policy of backroom deals and gunships sent to dictate other nations' economic policies, okay? This is their whole, what's it called, blueprint. That's what they do today. Here again was a racket, a state-run operation that used military power to accumulate cheap bananas. Cheap bananas from Costa Rica, right? And who's bringing them the cheap bananas? Black Star Line got into all that, making himself rich. Yeah, Marcus Garvey. Cheap labor in Costa Rica, black folks in Costa Rica working. Cheap labor so he can become rich for these imperial people, for American corporations. So cheap bananas and other economic advantages for American corporations and consumers without respect, is what I was just saying right now, without respect for the well-being of foreign workers. Marcus Garvey did the same, guys, or the fairness of democracy of foreign states. He did the same. Now who owns all these banana things? It's all Dole, Chiquita Banana Dole. Who gave him all that? Yeah. Roosevelt won election in 1904 and stolid Ohioan William Howard Taft delivered Bryan his third and final presidential defeat in the election of 1908. And some American voters roundly ratified the imperial adventure that began with a suspicious explosion in Havana Harbor, right, that they orchestrated, or at least white American males did so. The only people who could vote in most of the country, since women still could not vote at all, and male Negroes, in parentheses, right? Negroes, in parentheses, because who's in there? There's a lot of Indians in there. There's a lot of couple black Europeans, yeah. Negroes, huh? Filipinos, black Mexicans, all that, right? Like Negroes, huh? In parentheses. And other people of color were by then mostly disenfranchised. By 1908, early 1900s, Reconstruction, I told you guys, this just started. That whole white privilege, all that. 1900s. That's when you were mostly disenfranchised from what you had, all your history, your ethnicity, your identity. American imperialism influenced American culture, industries in interesting and sometimes unexpected ways. On the one hand, circuses drew millions of viewers to patriotic spectacles, restaging the exploits of American forces in Cuba and China. You guys hear that? World fairs, complete with reproductions of warships that moved on wheels across the sawdust rings of the big tops. More surprisingly, the war led to a surplus of brass instruments cast off from military bands, which made such second-hand instruments affordable for the masses and allowed them to land in the hands of black musicians. Listen, in places such as the Colored Waves Home for Boys in New Orleans. Man, you guys understanding the background. How did all these poor folk get all these instruments? Now you know. And what happened when they got these instruments, when they got their hands on these tools, they showed the world, right? They were themselves. They showed their talent. It's natural. It's natural. Once they got their instrument and tools back. But that's deep right there. So because of these were really war instruments. All these leftover instruments ended up cheaper for people of lower income. So that included obviously people who were disfranchised at the time, living poor, living in probably inner cities. So-called black musicians. In New Orleans, where a boy named Louis Armstrong learned to play the cornet after he was arrested in 1910 at 9 years old for being a dangerous and suspicious character. Wow. On May 31st, 1913, the New Orleans Times-Picayune recorded that an 11-year-old Armstrong led the parade of 16 little black imps. Wow. Wow. Racist, right? Overtone. Disclaimer, I'm not saying that, it's what I'm reading, okay? In honor of Federal Decoration Day, now called Memorial Day. Armstrong got his start playing patriotic music in patriotic parade. But black children in their so-called blackness could always be compared to imps. Whoa. Dodge the hijack. Those diminutive demons so often pictured on the shoulders of magicians. Wow, man. That's so wrong. And the white tie entails imperial era of Euro-American magic. The comparison to the original Pickaninny, the Pickaninny band of an old Kentucky, right? That was part 1 we read. Check out part 1 if you haven't, guys. And its original cornet playing pin-sized bandmaster Walter Brister He's saying could be the real Drew Ali. All right, check out part 1 and 2, okay, guys? Must have been obvious to many. So the band master Walter Brister must have been obvious to many since by then in old Kentucky, remember that was a real band, famous band. They even went to Broadway and played in Broadway. Had become the most popular American play of all time, of all time, of all time. Spawned dozens of imitators and had already been made into a movie, which was only the first of 4 film versions released between 1909 and 1935. The last one featured Native American comedy star Will Rogers and the great African American dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson. Robinson, another inheritor of Walter Brister's legacy, as the first black child star on The Great White Way, appeared in other films with tap dancing with Shirley Temple. Huh? Who taught Shirley Temple? Huh? Now you see. Okay. Yeah. The expansion of American military power overseas also facilitated travel opportunities for American entertainers, including circuses and individual Afro-Americans, in parentheses, Dodge the hijack, who started to travel across the Pacific to Hawaii and Australia as steamer travel across that great ocean became a commonplace. Blacks of the era, so-called blacks, right, crayon colors, of the era found themselves on the horns of a dilemma. They were often agents of U.S. military power and representatives of the nation abroad, and yet as black people, they had endured disenfranchisement, guys, look, and third-class citizenship that made their situation much like that of the people of color in American and European colonies, just like the foes in Latin America, man. That's what I'm saying. We gotta stop that separation. This disenfranchisement, they're admitting, guys, what we've been realizing really happened. You've been disenfranchising this corporation they created. You're a crayon colored now. That's why they can easily do whatever they like. Lock you up for years, put you in, stop you for nothing in the street, all that. Wow. So Charlie Temple said that, Susan. So we got Susan saying, if you become a UN ambassador after your acting career, you might be an agent. Charlie Temple. All right. Yeah. So I think that was the end of this chapter. No worries, guys. We're going to go on to chapter 5. Yeah, you guys I hope you enjoyed the reading. I really enjoy the book, the content, like what this author, what he's talking about, how he gets into the background of certain things most people don't think about or know, but it's history, guys, right? This is history, and it helps to really picture certain things and tie certain things together. We're moving on to, the next chapter right here, and it says chapter 5, Hindu magic. Oh, east. All right. Well, we're gonna skip that. It says here, the Pawnee Bill Wild West show covered the 30 miles on the Pennsylvania Railroad from Perth Amboy to Princeton, New Jersey, on Sunday, May 14th, 1899. The heaving steam locomotive made the short trek in good time, grunting and spewing steam theatrically as it wheezed its way through the spring countryside, with the entire contents of Wild West show loaded onto specially constructed freight cars and passenger compartments behind its coal-fired black boilers. The train deposited Pawnee builds men, women, and animals at a large empty lot on Cottage Street in the college town of Princeton, New Jersey, and a crowd of locals came just to watch the wondrous spectacle of hundreds of men and women unloading their possessions, erecting the grandstands, and stretching the canvas over the viewing area. They created an outdoor arena about as big as one side of a football stadium, in which the uppermost seat was no more than perhaps 20 rows high. The arena was big enough to seat around 14,000 spectators at a time. Wow. Temporary arenas that fit 14,000 people. Wow. Without a bad seat in the house. The weather was fair and the excitement was palpable among the crowds of local kids, men and women, watching the horses, cowboys, and various people of color. Listen, various people of color, many in Western dress or native costumes, huh? See, I don't know what they're gonna get to in this book if they're trying to say, well, they weren't natives or cowboys, right? But we know they were, right? So they just represented themselves mostly. When we talking about who's the real cowboys, right? Who's the original so-called cowboys? That was a derogatory word, cowboy. They're trying to call you boy, hey boy. But that was, yeah, originally. And who they learning from? The original horse riders, the Indians, huh? It's in the blood. It's in the blood. So various people of color, many in Western dress, huh? Many in Western dress. Would you look at that, huh? Others were buffalo soldiers, wearing dashing navy blue uniforms with shiny brass buttons. Black veterans of the 10th Cavalry Regiment of the U.S. Army that had seen action fighting Indians on the Western Plains, Spaniards in Cuba, and Filipinos in the Philippines. The show was led by Major G.W. Lilly, White Chief of the Pawnee and hero of Oklahoma, a frontiersman and former Pawnee Indian, teacher and interpreter who wore a broad-brimmed hat over his wavy shoulder-length chestnut brown hair, much like his show business mentor, Buffalo Bill Cody. He was joined by his wife, Miss May Lilly, the world-class horseback shot, herself a native of Pennsylvania and a graduate of the elite Smith College for Women in Northampton, Massachusetts. In addition, there were cowboys like John M. Murphy, aka Wild Horse Jack, a former Rough Rider who had fought with Teddy Roosevelt in Cuba, and the king of the cowboys, Head Quinn, whose mustache was so bushy it entered a room before he did, and whose very name sounded like cousin. Wow. It's like his name sounds like a swear, and his mustache was so big, man. Oh, you guys heard. There were also 6 Cheyenne Indian men, 7 Sioux men, 4 Sioux women, and 3 Sioux children, as well as their interpreter. All right, and I've shown a lot of these Sioux men and what they look like, guys. And then I showed a picture of one of them, literally from the show, the Wild, Bill, whatever, West show. And then I showed him after, when he was disfranchised and in normal clothes, and now he's a Negro. Same person. He was a Sioux, one of the Sioux, riding with Buffalo Bill and all these people. Okay? I showed the pictures, guys. Like, that's what I said. Catch up on everything, guys. Check out, even my Instagram pictures. I got a lot of the images there, right? So, 6 Cheyenne Indians, 7 Sioux men, 4 Sioux women, and 3 Sioux children, as well as their interpreter. In addition to showing off their equestrian skills, some Indians performed the ghost dance, a phenomenon that started with a northern Paiute prophet named Voka outside Virginia City, Nevada. Huh. Nevada in 1899, and swept across Indian communities of North America. As adopted by the Lakota Sioux, the ghost dance was a circle dance performed for 5 days, thought to be able to renew the earth, wash away evil, and remove all whites. Ha! and their livestock from the land, so-called white status. They told the people they could dance a new world into being. In the words of Minikonju Lakota Sioux chief Lame Deer, there would be landslides, earthquakes, and big winds. Hills would pile up on each other. The earth would roll up like a carpet with all the white man's ugly things. The stinking new animals, sheep and pigs, the fences, the telegraph poles, the mines and factories. Underneath would be the wonderful, all new world, as it had been before the white, fat takers came. The white man will be rolled up, disappear, go back to their own continent. Much as much as corporations figured out how to commodify dissent after the 1960s, Wild West shows turned the ghost dance into entertainment. It became entertainment powwow, for the very people the dance sought to eliminate from North America. Oh man, they flipped it on us. Oh man, oh man. And instead of eliminating, now it's attracting them, huh? Now you're still entertaining them, huh? Get it? You're still entertaining them. But the true meaning of this ceremony could not have been lost on all of the people of color who lived with the Indians day in and day out. Dodge the haja. That's why I told you he's trying to say these people of color are not the Indians, right? They live with the Indians, people of color. What about the Indians? What color are they, huh? Are they pale skin at this time, 1890s? I want to see. Who you talking about? These avatars of the western frontier did very well for themselves in the East. Business in New Jersey had been phenomenal. But Wild West shows did more than simply depict the West, as if that could ever be simple task in itself. They also portrayed the East in a hetero world outside the boundaries of the United States, boundaries that were themselves rapidly expanding. The following morning, Monday, May 15th, 1899, dawned another fair spring day. The cooks for the show were up before dawn to prepare hundreds of cups of coffee and enough breakfast foods to feed an army in the show's canvas mess rent, or tent, sorry. The masses of performers and laborers were so numerous it took 15 waiters to serve them. Among the hungry that day were performers with names like Mexican Rufus, or Rufus, Cowboys Shin Hegley and Tex Smith, Cheyenne Indians Big Man, Leffy Medicine Horse, and Texan, and Arabian acrobats Sarapon, Abdallah Side, and Ambar Ali. In the stables where hundreds of horses were penned, where hundreds of horses were penned, the smell of coffee mingled with the pungent aroma of manure and the sweet smell of animal feed as groomed worked hay and alfalfa for the animals' morning meal and began to process of saddling the steeds for their riders. Wow. So that description of the smell that morning brought back some memories from me. I remember in my grandma's farm, same thing, waking up, coffee, the manure, the coffee, because they're getting the cow's milk in the morning. It's like, oh man, I know exactly what they're talking about. The canvas men had already hitched horse teams to great ropes and pounded giant stakes into the ground with precisely timed blows of heavy sledges to raise the 600-foot square arena canopy. The 100 by 220-foot horse tent, the 90 by 50-foot dressing tent, and the annex tent. Somewhere in the midst of all this activity strode a Hindu wonder worker. Listen to who this Hindu wonder worker is, right? We're gonna go over again and again. You might not remember Armmah Sotanki if you haven't watched part one, but if you guys watched part one, remember that was the guy Walter Brister. This was a so-called black man, the so-called Hindu, the so-called ancient Egyptian adept, right? All right. So it says somewhere in the midst of all this activity strode a Hindu wonder worker named Armmah Sotanki. Since this was a parade day, he would have already been in costume by the time he made it from his bunk to the mess tent, perhaps exchanging a word with the Arab acrobats known as the Alice. Sotanki was a good-looking young man with a steady, almost hypnotic cast to his eyes. He was young in 1899, about 20 years old, right? He was like, listen, he was about 19 or 20, guys. If you remember, this is the guy he's trying to associate, say, hey, this might be Thomas Drew, who became Noble Drew Ali eventually. Remember his mysterious origin, Drew Ali's. We've gone over that, guys. You got to put everything into play and just dig on everything. Everything's at play when nobody knows anything and can't prove it. So he was a good-looking young man. He was about 20 right now in 1899. His costume consisted of an ornate satin-like tunic that was brocaded at the neck and breast pocket and covered with stripes and circular decorations. It was finished off with a long string of beads that he doubled over 4 times to create 5 loops from his belly button to his clavicle, and he topped his head with a long stretch of cloth that he wrapped into a turban. The artist who drew his picture drew a long mustache with upturned ends over the corners of his mouth, but that mustache was likely either a prop or simply a flight of fancy, as Sotanki could grow no such mustache, at least not at that young age. His photograph the following year shows not much more than a shadow gracing his upper lip. All right, let me see if I can get the image again so you guys can see what they're talking about. Uh, yeah, I don't have the. Well, and anyways, watch part one, guys. Watch part one. I'm like trying to look for it in my computer. I got so many images everywhere. So hold on. You can check out part one. Here with Pawnee Bill, Armmah Sotanki led his own troop, his barouche, a small horse-drawn carriage, even led the parade, coming right behind the bugler and in front of the bandwagon and everyone else. All right, he's riding with who? Pawnee Bill and Buffalo Bill and all these people, right? No, was it? Yeah, no, not Buffalo Bill. The other guy uh, who runs the circuses. It may have been called a Wild West show, but there were so many acts from Asia and Arabia that the posters, the show's advancement pasted all over the buildings along the route would soon start billing it as a Wild East show instead. So Tanki was what you would call a fakir in its original sense. That sounds like fake, right? Fakir, faker. The word is pronounced fakir. Yo, all right, disclaimer, we're not swearing here. A faker, faker, yeah, with the accent on the last syllable. It comes from the Arabic, but you guys see, meaning poor man. The Oxford English Dictionary defines fakir to mean properly an indigent person, but specially applied to a Mohammedan religious mendicant, and then loosely and inaccurately to Hindu devotees and naked ascetics. In the United States, the word was used to denote a faker. This is the origin of this word. Listen, guys, a faker, especially one who sold small goods and patent medicines. You guys know Drew Ali did that, right? He was a magician before the whole thing, all that. So it kind of matches a little bit the background that had mysterious background of his whole youth we don't know about. Remember, he just came out of nowhere. Erroneous or not, the word has evolved to contain both meanings. Fakers were both the men who followed Pawnee Bill's show selling medicinal potions of dubious efficacy, and they were also Hindu magicians like Armmah Sotanki. The word itself had spread from Muslim religious beggars to Hindu devotees. Sotanki himself would traverse this continuum between Hindu and Mohammedan, but that journey was still many years ahead of him when he sat there in his carriage with his fellow Hindus at the end of the Pawnee Bill parade, winding his way off the lot on Cottage Street in Princeton that fair spring day in 1899. Okay, here we go. I just want to show you guys this real quick. All right. I'm gonna show you this real quick. All right, here we go. Okay, so part one, check it out. This is where I show the image. This is the image right here. That's him right here, guys. That's Armmah Sotanki, the so-called black man from America. Walter Brister is his real name, Walter Brister. They were, you see what, this is what I'm trying to show you guys. These people were imitating Hindus, Muslims, ancient Egyptian adepts, sorcerers, all that stuff. Okay? And this lady right here, I forget her name, but if you check out she's the so-called princess, right? If you pay attention to what she looks like, he looks like, right? Oh gosh, let me see if I have the image. I just have to bring this up, right? Okay, let me just see. Hopefully I got the image ready. When there. Okay. Hold on. There's an image of Noble Drew Ali with her at an older age, guys. This is what I'm trying to tell you. The one where he's in the temple. Let's see if I can pull it up. Not this one with all the people. There we go. Let me see if I can get a bigger one. I showed it on part one. That's why I want you guys to go ahead and check it out. You know? Let me see. So that's kind of the only one. See, this is the one I'm talking about, though. Let me see. Wow, this is small. There we go. That's her right here in the middle, guys. It's her in the middle. Trust me, at an older age. It's her. This is them young. We got some drop here. I'm telling you guys. Don't sleep on this info. There is an origin to everybody, guys. It's not no virgin birth and no miraculous, sent from God, like that's, come on, guys. Like, with his long string of dozens of costumed riders astride impressive horses, the parade line unspooled itself like an exotic millipede before the disbelieving eyes of the townspeople and the nods of children who had gathered to watch. This was no ordinary parade. Everyone in the show was readying themselves for battle as much as for display. For 50 years, the students and townspeople of sleepy Princeton, New Jersey, had decreed that no circus parade was allowed to pass the campus of the August College. Princeton was laid out in such a way that it was impossible to parade through the town without passing the college twice, going and returning. From the Civil War until the Spanish-American War, what started as a local custom had become an unwritten law against the urging of the town fathers who feared violence if the show attempted to parade. Pawnee Bill, the hero of Oklahoma, determined to proceed. He had faced more fearsome foes in the real Wild West on that day. He and his fellow performers would attempt to open Princeton as a marker for tented shows by force. If necessary. From his perch on the barouche at the head of the parade, just behind the bugler, Armmah Sotanki, right? I just showed you the image of him, right? Could see the bandwagon trailing him, full of 11 Italian musicians in dressy uniforms with brass buttons under the baton of Nicola Oliveri, a bespectacled young fellow with neatly parted hair plastered on his forehead and perfectly waxed and upturned handlebar mustache. Next came Pawnee Bill himself, and his wide brimmed hat with his flowing brown locks, looking extravagantly and romantically Western, like one of the three musketeers in buckskin clothing. The line of the parade stretched for blocks and included about 120 mounted people in colorful costumes, cowboys in large hats and French shirts, Indians in war paint and feathers, lady riders riding side saddle and long Victorian dresses, Russian Cossacks in dark uniform, Mexican vaqueros, Argentinian gauchos, and Arab Bedouin riders with keffiyeh covered heads and flowing white robes, among many others. Children and other spectators took in the spectacle and ran alongside, but as the parade reached downtown, Armmah Sotanki, aka Drew Elite, could plainly see from his perch that there was trouble brewing ahead. The music of the bandwagon coming down Nassau Street could be heard just when Princeton students were streaming outdoors to go from the first morning lecture to the second. Drawn by the music, around 600 or 700 of them joined the Princeton townspeople who were massed on Nassau Street, not far from the college. Newspaper accounts pieced together after the fact reported the total at 700, but the show's chronicler, who was actually there but had more reason to exaggerate, estimated twice as many. Regardless, Pawnee Bill's crew was badly outnumbered. The crowd of Princetonians assembled in front of the college, completely blocking the street. All of Pawnee Bill's performers steeled themselves for a fight as they approached the mass of rowdy students. But something remarkable happened when the parade reached the roadblock of Princeton Tigers. First, the bugler arrived, and the students let the bugler through. Then Armmah Sotanki and his fellow Hindus, all black folks, Miss Arkorskia, Arjaili, and Armeto approached, followed by the bandwagon, and the students let the emissaries of the Orient and the makers of music pass unmolested. It was as if Sotanki's Eastern dress had commanded students bent on trouble to become docile, almost hypnotized by an Orientalist Jedi mind trick. Huh. Hypnotized by an Orientalist Jedi mind tricks, huh? Princeton was then, as it is now, an institution that celebrated the merit of academic Orientalism, and it is telling that students set on mischief let the emissaries of the East pass. But when Pawnee Bill approached, someone threw a firecracker under his horse. The firecracker exploded with a bang, and it was off to the races. First, Pawnee Bill's frightened horse charged through the crowd, and then the other riders raced through the gap that Bill's horse had created. May Lily and her fellow lady riders galloped their horses through the gap, riding side saddle, and then the Arabs, so-called Arabs, right, black folks, came at full speed, and the Indians zipped through with their horses and stagecoach, so-called Indians too. It soon looked like it was a race course instead of street parade. A member of Pawnee Bill's outfit reported, for expert horsemen and women galloping horses through a mass of college students, even extremely entitled college students, did not pose much of a challenge. Huh. The only mishap was that one horse harnessed to a team of horses slipped, fell, and was dragged a considerable distance. The Princeton students' faces were crestfallen when they realized they would not be able to stop the parade, and they went to work to halt it upon its return. They laid in stores of rotten vegetables and entire crates of eggs, either bought or stolen from the six grocers lining Nassau Street, which faced the college. Those who could not get their hands on rotten food tore up chunks of turf from Princeton's famously verdant lawns. Others stockpiled rocks, determined to stop the parade at all cost. Three members of Pawnee Bill's advance crew were mingling among the milling crowds, and when they saw the students making preparations for war, they warned members of the Wild West show to be ready to defend themselves. The parade attempted to avoid the throng now massed in front of the post office, about a block and a half from the entrance to the campus, by heading north abruptly into John Lane, dodging the throng on Nassau Street. But the crowd saw that the show was trying to do and swooped down on the parade with a fusillade of eggs, potatoes, clods of turf, and firecrackers. Many of the eggs missed their marks and instead comically splattered their friends on the other side of the street. But horses and riders alike got pelted nonetheless. Cowboys and Indians responded by charging the students and whipping them with their bullwhips, which proved to be the turning point. Stunned by the whips and bruised by the riders riding into them, the students became ugly and started throwing rocks. The aim of the students was good, and the scene was exciting. According to the New York Times, Pawnee Bill's frontiersmen let loose on the crowd of students in a manner that betrayed a fundamentally different attitude toward personal injury and the law than those operative in our own time. The Argentinian and Mexican gauchos used their bolas, leather straps with laden weights at either end, with great effect against the crowd, while the cowboys and Indians used their whips and charged the crowd, trampling those who could not get out of the way. Some performers drew their pistols and fired live rounds over the students' heads, or intentionally burned students' faces with the muzzle flashes from blank cartridges. Irate cowboys and gauchos lassoed college students and dragged them over the washboard streets like poor little lambs who had lost their way, as Princeton's rivals in New Haven would later sing of themselves. Wow. Wow, see what they're doing to the students at Princeton? Can you imagine that? Like, picturing all that, right? From the Baruch Sotanki had an unobstructed view of the cowboys and Indians ramming the crowd of stone-throwing elite white students with their horses and lashing them with rawhide whips normally used for driving herds of cattle on the western plains. He watched a wild horse Jack, wearing a thick, dark mustache, under his broad-brimmed hat, charge his horse into the crowd. Jack and other expert riders easily controlled their horses, pushing the students back from Nassau Street and forcing them to flee backward, tripping over themselves as their fellow students rained a hailstorm of vegetables, eggs, and rocks down upon the mounted riders. Sotanki could see the fabric-covered heads of the Ali brothers, in their flowing robes on their beautiful Arabian steeds, take the fight to students who resisted. Circuses and Wild West shows had been importing these horses for decades, along with their Arabian riders, most from Morocco. Morocco, huh? The ancient home of the fabled Moors, huh? Where's he getting his Morocco, ancient Moors influence, huh? Sotanki, aka Drew. Huh. The Ali brothers that day included Charles Lewis, a white high diver, acrobat, and horseman who was known in the show as Charles Lewis Ali. All right, he was, you guys hear that? As the Ali brothers drove their wild eyed mounts back and forth, their hooves clattering over the paving stones, and the Indians, cowboys, and gauchos, and other mounted riders lashed the elite white students with whips, lassos, and bolas. Hundreds of hollering, panicking students sought refuge in the shops and side streets of Nassau Street, and others flooded in retreat back over the lawns that minutes earlier they had torn up for fusillades. All right. Hey, much love, LaBurn. Thank you. Appreciate it. You're very welcome. Blessings to you. What had started as a college prank went from farce to tragedy. A Princeton student was trampled by a pony, and a badly injured and colored man, local colored man, Edward Demon, had his skull fractured when he was kicked by a horse. Wow. Many students and many mounted riders were injured in the fray. Sotanki saw blood spilled everywhere. According to the show's own route book compiler, H.G. Wilson, the performers drove them back into the college campus, whipped for the first time in Princeton's existence by a traveling exhibition company and licked good. They got licked good, right? And where was Sotanki the whole time? He didn't even he was from the top watching. You guys read, right? He wasn't even involved. You see that? He didn't help his people, his crew, the people he was with. Huh. Come on, Armmah Sotanki, aka Drew. Armmah Sotanki would have seen all this mayhem. Whether he dismounted from his carriage and took part in the ruckus or not, and the capability of people of color, including the Arabian Ali brothers, to defend themselves from one of the most concentrated pools of privileged, wealthy white Anglo Saxon Protestants, Dash the hijack, could not have failed to make an impression on the young Hindu wonder worker. Ha! The riot only ended when the giant bandwagon, with its four-horse team, barreled down the street, clearing the way of whatever students remained. Afterwards, the streets and lawns of some of the residences were so transformed, no doubt littered with debris, pieces of clothing, and pools of blood, that one could imagine you were looking at the results of the San Juan Hill battle, laying everywhere. In the words of the Pawnee Bill Wild West show's chronicler, but this was a multiracial San Juan Hill battle of a different kind, multiracial. The show's official account singled out the work of performers such as McCollum, Stoneman, Taylor, Murphy, and Tex Smith, along with Mexican Joe, the Ali brothers, and the Indians. In fact, all of them cannot be commended too highly. In other words, Mexicans, Arabs, Indians with whips, and Argentinian gauchos slinging bolas were fighting side by side with white whip yielding American cowboys against the most elite white male students in the country. The skirmish pitted about 120 mounted people against hundreds of students who, though supposed to represent some of the best families, in the words of Pawnee Bill Scribe, supposed to have qualities that only culture, refinement, and education can develop, resort to some of the most brutal acts to accomplish their ends, such as cutting one of our horses, a dumb brute unable to defend himself. The trampled black townsman was left unconscious and near death, while many students were bloodied and bruised, some with lacerations from whips wielded by the Indians. The Princeton students earned themselves a severe reprimand from the college president, Francis Langley Patton, who condemned the attack on the parade and strictly forbade the students from attending the show. Some townsfolk pledged they would not go either in solidarity with the students, but many students attended anyway and received a lecture from Pawnee Bill and Miss May. Such was the irresistible thrill and the power of tented traveling shows in an era when they were the premier, listen, theatrical spectacles in the land. This is how you went to the movies, right? This is how you went to be entertained, like when it come out to a show, like theatrical, right? The Princeton Riot, as it became known, was reported by the Associated Press and made headlines nationwide, some of which portray what might appear to contemporary readers as a curious lack of concern with the rawhide and pistol whipping of townspeople and Ivy League college students by a motley crew of mounted athletes and former soldiers from around the world, including many foreigners and indigenous people who would have been considered people of color then as now. All right, body bag for the illusion. Yo, shout out to Drop. Shout out to Drop, man. Come on, man. Again, I'm gonna read that part. Y'all paying attention to what's going on in the chat? What's going on in the chat? All right, y'all blocking people. What's going on? I'm gonna read that to you again, including many foreigners and indigenous people who would have been considered people of color, then as in now. Far from being embarrassed or ashamed of their actions, the Pawnee Bill Show chronicled the event blow by blow while the Los Angeles Herald proclaimed cowboys show good temper and failing to resort. Sorry, while the Los Angeles, yes. cowboys show good temper and failing to resort to the use of clubs. If Armmah Sotanki learned something that dramatic day, it was not simply that it was a bad idea for a bunch of Ivy League students who were merely paper tigers to try and mess with a bunch of cowboys, Indians, buffalo soldiers, and other rough-hewn frontiersmen and women. He also would have learned that wearing a turban and representing the brown-skinned Orient actually could spare one from harassment. Listen, what did he learn? He's like, hey, this gig can get me places. This can probably, hey, I can get something about, right? Pretending to be someone else. Again, he also would have learned that wearing a turban, and representing the brown-skinned Orient actually could spare one from harassment. Remembering how the seas parted for his carriage as if he were Moses, only to engulf the others performers behind him. Being Oriental, or at least appearing as such, allowed Armmah Sotanki, is a black man, right? aka Walter Brister, that's his real name, guys, and his group of Hindu wonder workers, these are all black folks, to pass unmolested through the ill tempered crowd, while the cowboys, Indians, and vaqueros had no such luck. As Afro Americans would discover, if they did not already know, wearing a turban and representing the East allowed one the privileges of sitting in the best railway car instead of Jim Crow cars. Listen, spared them the brunt of racist violence and gave them a claim to an ancient Asiatic identity that was older than the conflict between cowboys and Indians. This is deep, let alone the conflict pitting cowboys and Indians against Ivy League students. Whether Sotanki was aware of it or not, to be an Ali meant being part of a Muslim identity, linking one to an exalted lineage tracing back to the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. All right, you guys see? imitating, imitating. Why did, wow. To be an Oriental faker, right? Oriental faker meant to be part of a Muslim inflected Indian identity older and more venerable than the United States of America itself. All right. Armmah Sotanki, or aka Noble Drew Ali, own identity was something of a mystery in 1899. But the following year, when he signed on for another tour with Pawnee Bill, that mystery was solved. This time, just before the turn of the century, rather than a line drawing of Sotanki, the souvenir route book printed a photograph of a colored young man, and underneath the photograph, the letterpress print left a clue imprinted into the thick cotton paper in capitalized blank ink. The Sotankis, Hindoo fakers, Walter Brister. All right, Walter Brister, huh? Above his searching eyes arched two delicate eyebrows, and between them lay a long nose with wide, rounded nostrils and full lips. Not insignificantly, Sotanki's skin was brown, and his features were those of someone of sub-Saharan African ancestry. When he was not in his costume, he would be recognized as black or Negro, colored or Afro-American, and discriminated against by white folks accordingly. All right, so we dodged the hijack that sub-Saharans hold called. That's not that look is not unique to West Africa. All right, dodge the hijack. But we know what he's talking about. He's saying basically when he didn't have his costume on, when he wasn't playing the Hindu wanderer role, he was just a so-called black man. But underneath the turban, and at a time when most Americans had no idea how people from the Indian subcontinent looked, right? Or really, or you mean when they really knew what they really looked like, the original. So Tanki was no longer Afro-American and no longer had to play the humiliating role of musical pickaninny. He was now a foreigner, a magician, a master of esoteric mysteries. All right, Walter Brister, huh? AKA Armmah Sotanki, aka Thomas Drew. Wow. That's what I'm saying, guys. The book, maybe these chapters weren't as deep as you may think. I think they were. It was pretty good, especially the first one we read. That was pretty interesting. Um, we're gonna stay right here today, right? It's already been an hour and a half. We got two chapters in of review, education, fair use, right? Commentary purposes. Yeah, we learned a lot, right? We're learning a lot. It's getting deep. The rabbit hole is getting deep. All right. Again, this was the book, The Princess and the Prophet, The Secret History of Magic, Race, and Black Muslims in America by Jacob S. Dorman. Okay. Jacob S. Dorman. And once again, make sure if you missed the first couple of reviews of this book, make sure you catch the previous videos, guys, and get to know who the great Armmah Sotanki, Walter Bristol, like what we went over. Like it gets deep, guys. And then part two is even deeper. Like I thought part two was so deep. This drop I have to go over again. Like, we have to definitely go over and follow up on it. The Black Muslim movements planted in Chicago's World's Fair. That's where all these Black Muslim movements started, guys. And then you see they went into these circus, running around in these circuses, right? And then what happened? They became street peddlers, magicians, and all that, huh? And then what happened? Oh, now they're preachers. Now they got a whole black movement. Yeah, this may be too much of a truth for certain people. They ain't ready for this. You already know. Appreciate you guys coming through today on this Tuesday evening here in the Americas, in the old Atlantis, the true old world. It's evening time, it's nighttime here. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Shout out to everybody that was in the live chat. I hope you enjoyed the reading. 25-cent incubator babies, he said. I'm just reading the chat. So appreciate it again, everybody in the live chat. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm telling you, the book is gonna get really good. That's why I didn't want to skip certain things, right? So we can have context. The book is gonna get really good, guys. Don't worry, we're gonna get through, get all the info always, right? Going through mad books. Pat yourself on the back. You've been reading so much last couple of years. Going through so much info, putting so much together, right? Digging through history. Historical investigators. Thank you for participating with me in that. So I don't have to do this alone. You know, and all these amazing finds I can share with everybody. Appreciate you guys for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Again, I got this book in my Patreon page if you want to just own it. If you want to do a one-time, you guys can unlock any post on my Patreon page without being a patron. If you don't want to be a monthly supporter, you can unlock posts, with a small fee. As a donation though, right? It's a donation literally. But if you're a patron, there's no fee. You can download it anytime. All the books I share on my Patreon page. Okay. Appreciate you guys. We're gonna go out now. I'll check you on the next one. I'll check you on the rebound. All right. Much love and respect. Much love and respect, mi gente. Pura vida. Pure life. Pura vida. Hawaii.